year we kind of expanded the garden a little bit with the purpose to give away a lot of the food, and it was very, very popular. A lot of friends wanted a lot of food, and so I realized that I needed to do something bigger to satisfy that need. About that same time, saw that movie Food Inc. that you did as well, and that kind of spurred us on to this 7.5 acres that we now farm.
What actually is a co-op or shared farm? How does that work?
Well, people buy a share of the crops that we harvest. So this year we had 85 shares, and that was based upon the amount of crops that we had. And they kind of share in the risk and reward of agriculture. If we have an overabundance of something, they participate in that, and if we have a crop failure, then they participate in that as well and don't get that crop. And so what they do is they pay an annual fee or a seasonal fee for that particular growing season. So we grow in the summer and through the winter, and that gives them a share of the crops that we harvest for that season, and they come by the farm and get their box of vegetables every week during the summer, and in the winter every other week.
What did you do before farming?
I was in the credit card business, a normal corporate America job for 25 years.
So when did you decide to make the switch? I mean, was it as soon as you saw that video, or was it a long process?
Well, yeah, it was somewhere around there. Watching the video, and that's a tough decision, you know. And so, yeah, it was a long process, and I do remember I was at a farming event, and a writer was there, and he was signing my book and asked what I did for a living, and I said, well, as of today, this is the first time I've answered this question this way. I'm a farmer. And that was at the Seed Saver Exchange in Iowa last summer. So I guess that was when I really made the change.
What is the, you know, when you go to a grocery market and you see, okay, you have that little tiny organic section and you have all the regular food, what is the actual difference between the two?
Well, it's the growing practices. Organic has been defined by the government and a set of parameters around it, and there's certain chemicals and things that organic farmers can't use. And so it really comes down to the farming practices, the applications of things that they put on the crops that are not, toxic to humans, where a lot of things are toxic to humans that are used on crops, and you really ought to wash your vegetables before eating them. But I don't feel that way with anything that I grow. I feel like I can eat anything on the farm that I grow, because all we apply is compost, and let nature take care of the pests. The birds like to eat bugs, and good bugs like to eat other bad bugs, and so we go beyond organic. We don't use the organic rules that the government have established. We think that natural farming ought to be a much higher level than what the government has defined for organic farming.
So why is it that when I go to the grocery market, I'll see an apple that's organic, and then I'll see an apple that's just, typical store-bought apple. Why does the organic apple not look as shiny? Why is it not as big? What's behind that?
Well, the chemical farmers have worked out the processes to chemicals to kill every type of bug or disease that's going to hurt that apple in any way, and to give it the perfect nutrition, nitrogen levels or whatever that's going to allow it to grow to look the best, not necessarily to add the nutrition that you need for your body. They might wax their apples, and but the organic grower might wax his apples too. I don't know that I can specifically identify that particular crop and why it's better or not. But the unseen things about organics and buying from local farmers is the nutrition level, the flavor, and apples is a great example of flavor. I've stopped buying apples completely from the grocery store because most of the apples that we have available to us today are not harvested this year. I have a friend who has an orchard in Washington, and I was out there 6 or 8 years ago, and we were talking about farming in the orchard, and he mentioned that he wasn't harvesting his apples that year, and I said, well, why aren't you harvesting? He says, well, 2 reasons. It's more expensive to harvest than I can get paid for the apples, and the second thing is all the apple warehouses are full from last year's crop, and so they're not taking any more apples. And I said, well, what do you mean they're last year's crop? I want to buy a fresh apple that's grown this year. He goes, no. Most of the apples that you get are a year or 2 years old, and they just keep them in the warehouses. And so now, when I never knew before why when you bite into an apple, some of them are crisp and juicy and fresh tasting, and some of them are mealy, and they look great, but they don't taste good.
So, for hundreds of years in America, we farmed, naturally because we didn't have the chemicals, the pesticides. We've gone so far towards that arena of having everything processed. You're starting to see, movement of people like yourself and consumers that are wanting to go back to that. Is this a fad? Is this going to eventually change the way that America eats? Is there hope for us to go back?
Well, I think there is hope because we're seeing all demographics of people that have interest in good food. It's not something that's just trendy and people are doing that, Californians or whatever. I think once you taste the food, that makes a difference on you. I mean, when the thing about the apple, when you taste a real apple, you don't want those other apples. When you taste a tomato that I've grown on this farm, it's real, and it's not some. I mean, the tomatoes that you get in the grocery store today, they're flavorless. Even the ones that are attached to the little vines are not very good compared to what you can get on a tomato grown in season and harvested the day or two before you eat it. It's just a totally different flavor. And so, from set nutrition aside, you just look at flavor. That's reason enough to participate in the local food movement, because that's going to get you closest to the best flavor. And obviously, you should meet farmers that you're doing business with and get a level of understanding on how they're growing their food. not all local farmers are growing naturally or organically. And so I think it's real important to buy food that's been grown naturally as well.
Do you see local farming coming back to where it would overtake chemical farming?
Well, maybe the best chance of that would be in vegetables. Probably less chance of that in grain production. But it could happen. I wouldn't predict it, but it could happen. I'm going to do my part.